Thank you so much for coming. Well, you're here because you knew Betty. And when you knew Betty, you knew that I'm the rabbi, and she was what she would like to call very reform. Is that a good answer? Very reform. So I'm going to start the service with something that is not taken from the book, the rabbi book, not taken from Torah. I'm going to take it. I'll tell you where it came from after I finish reading, see if maybe you recognize it. I wanted a perfect ending. Now I've learned the hard way that some poems don't rhyme, some stories don't have a clear beginning, middle, and end. Life is about not knowing, having to change, taking the moment and making the best of it, without knowing what's going to happen next. Delicious ambiguity. Do you know who said that? It was Gilda Radner. Obviously, the circumstances were extremely different, but when I saw that quote, it made me think of Betty. And my job today is to see if we can honor her memory, put things into some perspective. So I wanted to let you know that she died between two Torah portions that are, I think, significant. So when she died, which was Saturday, we were reading the Torah portion that included the end of the plagues. And so the second to the last plague made me think about what we're going through. And that was 3 days of darkness, of darkness that was so heavy that we could barely get up. And sometimes that's what it feels like when we lose someone we love. But in that story about the 3 days of darkness, it also said that there was light, that the Israelites had light. And it made me realize, and I'm going to ask you a question, how many people ever experienced a time when they were with Betty where they left smiling? Did you ever leave smiling? So even when things were not the same, she somehow always made me smile. Always. The things she said, the things she did. One of the last times I visited her, we had a lovely visit, and I'm sure you know what much of it was about. You know that her husband was a pediatrician and that she had 4 children. And if you didn't hear that, you're going to hear it a lot today because it's important for you to hear it a lot. And she told me stories about her life, her children. And when I got to her, I said, I'm the rabbi. And we said a Shema, and when I left, she said to someone sitting next to her, that was so nice of that lady to come and visit me. And so even when there was a part of you that might have had a broken heart, she made me smile. She made me feel that there was something joyous about life. And so there was darkness, but there was light. When we were at the cemetery, and I'm glad almost none of you went because it was extremely muddy, and although the carpet is brown, I don't think we're ever going to get the mud out. But on the way here, the sun came out. It's beautiful out there now. It's beautiful, and that's what it reminded me of. Darkness, but then breaking through with the light. And then the next thing is freedom. That's what we get in our Torah portion. We get free. It turns out that God decided to not take us on a direct route to freedom, to the promised land. And so that will always remind me of Betty too. But then in the end, we made our way on dry land across the parted sea. That's what I'll remember. I'll always remember Betty. So now I begin with the formal part of what I'm supposed to say. Death has taken our beloved Betty. Our friends grieve in their darkened world. In their silence, there is lamentation. In their tears, there is loneliness. Lost in their sorrow, may they find the presence of loving friends. Hear them, O God, be with them. For Betty's love that united us in life and which death cannot sever. For her companionship that we shared along life's path and which continues through the tenderness of memory. For the gifts of her heart and mind that brought us joy and happiness and is now a precious remembrance. For all these and more, we give our thanks to God. In this time of grief, we listen to the voice of our sacred scriptures that brings us the ever-new message of God's nearness. It tells us of our kinship with the Creator, in light as in darkness, in joy as in sorrow, in death as in life. In your handout, on the back of your handout, you have two readings from, do you have your handout? Good. From scriptures. I invite you, I'm going to give a little snippet in Hebrew. I know she was a little bit allergic to Hebrew, but just a little. But just a little. So I'm going to give a little snippet of this in Hebrew, and then I'm going to invite you to help me read it in English for her. Adonai ro'i lo echsar, benot deshe yarbitzeni, al mei menuchot yenahaleni, nafshi yishovev. Please join me. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Eternal. And I would like to continue by reading the bottom one on those pages. Please join me. A woman of valor, who can find? She is more precious than fine pearls. Her husband trusts in her, and so he lacks nothing. She does him good, never harm, all the days of her life. She perceives that her labor is rewarding. Her candle burns on into the night. She reaches out to those in need and extends her hands to the poor. She is clothed in strength and dignity, and she faces the future cheerfully. She speaks with wisdom. The law of kindness is on her lips. Her children rise up and bless her. Her husband sings her praises. Many daughters have done valiantly, but you excel them all. Did you see her there? In his sorrow, Job cried out, Adonai natan v'Adonai lakach, Yehi Shem Adonai mevorach. God has given, God has taken away. Blessed be the name of God. An ancient people, we are well acquainted with grief and the valley of shadows. Death and sorrow are not strangers to us, yet the centuries have taught us that a good name endures beyond the grave, and there is strength in faith. With Job we say, Adonai Natan, God, you have given. You gave us a loved one who will not be forgotten. For all that was good and enduring in her life, we offer the deepest thanks of our hearts. Adonai Lakach, God, you've taken away. We pray for the strength to turn our broken hearts into an altar of trust, before which we acknowledge your sovereignty and love, as we now say, Yehi Shem Adonai Mevorach, blessed be the name of God, now and forever. At this point, she has family who would like to speak about her memories.
Before I speak about my mother, I would like to publicly thank my brother Jim. For the last 20 years, he has essentially been the person who has really handled all the affairs for Dad and then Mom and our family, myself, very, very grateful. I'd also like to thank my sister Judy for bringing me banana pudding for breakfast this morning. She was kind enough to make sure that I had it, and she obviously knows how grateful I am for that. And the people who knew Betty well, as far as meals were concerned, like Sybil and Carolyn, would know that if she were here this morning, and Gigi, we would have been eating French pancakes, without a doubt. Betty Friedenthal Levy, my mother, affectionately known to her, my friends at least, as the Bullet Betty. Let's examine some of the traits that made her so endearing to all of us. First of all, she was very capable, whether it was conducting a dinner party at the house or participating in the many charity functions for medical causes in the greater Shreveport area. She was an extremely capable and competent person. You knew if she was in charge, it was going to get done right. It was, after all, her way or the highway. So, speaking of her way or the highway, she was a bit stubborn. I mean, how else can you describe a person who makes a 10-year-old boy sit at the dinner table for over 3 hours until he ate every bit of the disgusting lima beans that were on the plate in front of him? Dependable. Throughout the years, Betty was kind of like the rock of the family. For me, my brothers and sisters, her sisters and extended family, someone you could really depend on when you needed the help. Another trait that she had that probably a lot of you didn't realize was she had a little sense of humor. I was visiting her recently at Montclair, and it happened to be October 31st, Halloween. And all of the group were gathered around the social director, waiting for the great activities of the day. And the social director stood up and said, "Does anyone know what today is?" And Betty, without batting an eye, said, "It's the day after yesterday." Pretty astute, don't you think? So those are just a few of the traits that Betty possessed. But what, you may ask, did Betty really love? First and foremost, Betty loved being a Friedenthal. There wasn't a day that went by when she didn't talk about growing up in Beverly Hills and how happy she was that Sybil and Carolyn were here raising their families with us. She was even over the moon when at some point Grandma Bess moved here, because that was kind of like the icing on the cake. The second thing she loved was being the wife of Dr. Harold Bernard Levy. She loved the title of Mrs. Doctor. And she was only willing to dole out medical advice to anyone who had a medical issue. And finally, she loved her extended family. She loved the people in this room, everyone who she came in contact with in Shreveport. And she also loved a lot of people who unfortunately are not here today, but I still think of. People like Harry and Melvin Goldberg, Simon and Elaine Harrell, Bill and Bee Bloomberg, the Joe Muroffs, and so many more. Unfortunately, the list is long. They are gone, but certainly not forgotten. So today marks the end of an era. It's sort of like the end of the Levy era here in Shreveport. And although we may come back to visit from time to time, we won't have our mother here to greet us and be with us during our visit. But today should not be sad, because as the rabbi said at the funeral, she's finally getting her wish for the last 15 years. She's now going to join her husband, Doc Levy, in life ever after. So go with God. We will remember.
Hello, everybody. I'm Allison Levy, Jim's daughter, Betty's granddaughter, from California. And Betty and I had a very sweet relationship. I would come every summer for a couple of weeks to stay with Doc and Betty, and just she and I would just have a grand old time. And she was just so loving and fun with me. And I wanted to I'm not going to speak very much. I was just going to sing a song that Doc and Betty loved so much. And at my dad's request, I've changed one of the words. So it's Stars Fell on Alabama. If you know it, sing along with me. But I'm going to change it to Louisiana, because here we are, and the stars are falling on Louisiana today. So. We lived our little drama. We kissed in a field of white, and stars fell on Louisiana last night. I can't forget the glamour. Your eyes held a tender light, and stars fell on Louisiana last night. I never planned in my imagination a situation so heavenly, a fairyland where no one else could enter, and in the center, just you and me, dear. My heart beat like a hammer. Your arms wound around me tight, and stars fell on Louisiana last night. So I hope that Doc and Betty are dancing to that right now.
I feel I have no need for introduction. I'm Judy Irene. In fact, My brother so graciously put it in the obituary, and now I have everyone in my new town calling me saying, "Is the Irene a Southern thing?" And I said, "Actually, it's the song Goodnight Irene," and they let my brother name me in the middle name, and I was so grateful Hang On Sloopy was not very popular back then. But as most of you know, my relationship with Mother was a lot more any daughter, especially with 3 older sons, and with a father that adored his girl. And I put girl because that was where sort of the competition came in. We had my mom, and then we had me. And when Mother would say, "No, you can't do that," I would say, "I'll go to Dad," because I knew, And didn't make for the. But as Chuck was saying earlier, her rigidness was something that I was thinking of memories. I remember where later years that my brother Jimmy and Chuck, when we were talking, they said, "We always thought dessert was something you ate the next morning because we always were sent from the table before dessert ever got there." And I remember you were talking about how Mom would dispense of her medicine, and most of it came from Marcus Welby or Dr. Kildare, or the Good Housekeeping. She always, and she would even fight with my dad, argue with my dad over something but Good Housekeeping said. And I remember one of her wishes before my dad passed away was, "Could I get a regular size tube of Neosporin?" Because we had the little bitty samples of everything. And I remember for her birthday, he went and got this gigantic, and he said, "This is yours. No one else has a sample like this." But I often go back and forth in my mind of my memories with my mom, and I realize, I guess as the older get, I don't think I've become her, but I think her influence on me is very much there. One of my favorite stories that so defines my mother is I was at a press conference when Bill Clinton had just become president, and they actually pulled me aside to ask me, how does someone that's running children's programs in Louisiana feel about the new president? And it actually made the Washington Post. So I called Mom. I said, "Mom, I'm quoted in the Washington Post." And she said, "What were you wearing?" And so I said, "It does say the badly clad lady from Louisiana." And so that was so my mother. And there are things that just, in fact, Andrew and Matthew, I think, helped me through therapy to break me of my mother's. Mother would always say, "Take your glasses off before you get a picture taken." And I mean, you see me just, when someone brings out a camera, I'm immediately going in there going, "Mom, just leave the glasses on." And so there's things that her influence definitely, and there's things like, okay, what am I going to wear? There may be some press people there, but it was almost like she just couldn't help herself when it came to that, and so that was one of the, I guess, biggest influences that she had in my life and continue on through the life ahead. And I realized that even though there was tension there, and a lot of it, like I said, was a matter of, I was not the nicest of daughters when I had a father that I could just say, "I know Dad will let me do it." But recently, after my dad passed away, I do know that rather than the mother-daughter relationship, it became more of a friendship. That when I would see her, when I talked with her, we would talk almost as if we were friends talking with each other, which made for. And so as I am here today, I realize now that we've went from mother-daughter to friendship, and that's what will stay with me. And if anything, it's the one thing my mother did try her hardest to do was keep us, the family, together. And she really instilled upon me that you're the only girl. You've got to keep the boys in line, as if. But So I just want to, I want to thank all of you that are here, because I know how important her friends were to her, and how much it meant to her that was a part of her life. I mean, when she became, I'm not going to ramble, but when she became ill, I remember we sat down with her and said, we have good facilities in San Francisco. We can move you close to Jim. You can move to Baton Rouge. And she adamantly was, I'm not leaving my friends in Shreveport. And the sad thing was her friends in Shreveport were leaving her, and we were trying to get her where she could be with us. But I think she did live the life the way she wanted to, and she was very happy. And so I just want to, again, thank y'all for being part of her life.
After listening to my brother Chuck and my sister Judy, I feel like I ought to tear this up because they've captured so much of who my mother was. But I do have a few comments. I want to thank the rabbi. I've been here for a few days. And I want to thank Renee for calling me a week ago today. And she said, "You're not coming Friday. You get here sooner." And that was a real blessing for me to be here on Wednesday. And the rabbi, through this whole process, is just a jewel. You people here are so lucky in Shreveport to have her. She is terrific. And the folks at Roseneath, who do the usual, very professional job, and very calm and very helpful. It's very special. I thank you all, as Judy said, for being here. I mean, you were all very special to her. I think she would not only be grateful, but maybe a bit surprised at the turnout, because there's been so much that's happened over the last few years in terms of people leaving us in this town. And it's nice to see those of you who are still around. I went to visit Lionel yesterday, you know, one of the last men standing, 99. Right? He's not standing very much right now, but I want to encourage you all to go by and see him. It's very important to him. There he is. Right. He made it out today. I had a wonderful visit with Lionel, and he really, I think, appreciates people who come by and hang out with him for a bit. Right, my friend? Yeah. When my grandmother died, my mother's mother, and they flew her out to Forest Lawn to be buried next to my grandfather, who died a month after I was born. My daughter walked over and looked at his gravestone and said, "He's been waiting for her a long time." Remember that? Well, I felt that this morning when we went out there, and there's Dad, who died almost 16 years ago. Seems like yesterday, but it was almost 16 years ago, and I looked there and I said, well, he's been waiting a long time for her. And everybody's here, you know, her 4 children, Jimmy, Chuck, Roger, and Judy Irene. She never called you anything but Judy Irene. Her sisters, Sybil and Carolyn. Her 2 daughters-in-law, Anita and Marcia. And most of her grandchildren and 3 of her nieces. It's very special. 2 great ladies that to us are also family that we've grown up with. Mother Ruth, whom I said to the other night, "You're my only mother now," you know. And Sister Jackie, who's like always been a sister to all of us because we grew up with her. We all grew up together. And her dad and my dad were like brothers. Most of you read the obituary, and I'm not going to go back through the history again. But when I wrote it, it dawned on me that there were many Bettys. And Chuck touched on some of the particular characteristics of my mother, but I those of us who were around her didn't know all of the pieces of her until you sort of start gathering in and thinking about all of the people in her life and where she's been and what. And, as her children, we only knew her as her children. We didn't know her before we were born. And to a great extent, once we left town, we didn't know her as well after that. We'd come back and visit. But she was like most of us, both very simple and very complicated. And depending on when you knew her and whether she was experiencing days of struggle or days of joy. So here are the many Bettys that at least I could recall, and I suspect her sisters and those who knew her well may even know other Bettys. There's the Beverly Hills girl and the UCLA co-ed. Only her mother and her sisters and maybe her husband knew her well in that context. We heard stories. There's the Army wife, married her husband 6 weeks after their first blind date, gave birth to her first son in Harlingen, Texas, of all places. This is Beverly Hills, Harlingen, Texas. And ends up in Shreveport after the end of the war. I always said to my dad, Beverly Hills, Shreveport, what were you thinking? And he said, Shreveport is home. Then she raised 4 children in Shreveport, and she was surrounded by Levys who wanted to raise us, right? And her husband was away a lot of the time. He was practicing medicine. He was going to the hospital at 5:30 in the morning. He was out in the evening. He was on call. Fortunately, a couple of her sister married local boys and came to town, and so she had not only their support, but a touchstone of her own family, and then her mom eventually came here, and the Friedenthals were reunited, except for Jane Who, and that's a joke in the family in California. As Chuck said, Mrs. Dr. Levy, and that was perhaps what she was proudest of in addition to her children. She married a well-known and much-loved doctor, and that was one of the greatest roles in her life. She was a homemaker whose house never looked like anyone lived in it, even though there were 4 wild children in it. She was the bullet, a zealous defender of her tribe outside of the house, and a strict disciplinarian inside the house. She was an adoring wife who always made sure that Honey fixed his hair and that he did not wear that tie. There was, of course, the late Mrs. Levy. That's how my father used to introduce her when they'd showed up a half an hour or more late to an event or a party, because Mama had her own clock. The only way we got them to the 50th anniversary party on time is we told her the limo was picking them up at 4. She was ready at 4:30, the limo came at 5. And then there was the widow Levy. And after adjusting as much as she could, and as much as any one of us could, to life without Doc, she seemed to relax and find a new identity as Betty Levy again. And for the last 10 plus years, almost setting a record, she was at Montclair Park and then the Chateaus, and she was sweet and funny and sassy. You could see in my sister where the sense of humor went. Right? Sassy. They called her Sweet Betty there. Many of us scratched our heads when we heard that. But I think over the last 2 or 3 days, I think I figured out why. She was shedding her responsibilities of raising children. She was shedding her responsibilities of managing a house, and she was shedding the responsibility of being Mrs. Dr. Levy. Because along with being Mrs. Dr. Levy came the glory and the responsibility to live up to being that. And she was very aware of that. And the memories that she retained of her life before she went into Montclair were mostly the good ones. So we saw her sweet, sociable self sitting in the lobby until 2 or 3 in the morning and greeting everybody who passed by. And in spite, as Judy said, in spite of our numerous attempts to move her out of here and move her to either Baton Rouge or to California where we could take care of her, she said, no, this is my home. My sister's here. My friends are here. This is my home. And she preferred to stay in Shreveport, and she was absolutely right. And it's because of all of you that she was here and that she came to love this town as much as she loved her original home in Beverly Hills. I truly believe that the care that she got from Renee and the staff at Montclair and the Chateau and the medical care from Dr. Bourne gave her years more of good life than we might have expected. I remember having a conversation with Dr. Bourne a couple of years ago when I said to him, are you surprised she's still with us? And he said, aren't you? Because given the prognosis, looking back 5 or 6 years and her known heart condition and so forth, we didn't expect her to get to 95, but she was determined. And she received great hospice care at the end and made her final days much more comfortable and restful. And then came a very peaceful death. She went to sleep on her birthday. She didn't wake up the next morning. And that is what we had hoped when the time came, and that I think all of us hope for ourselves when it's our time, that we go to sleep peacefully and don't wake up. But she was the late Mrs. Levy once again, because she didn't die on her birthday. She waited until the next morning. My father would have been so proud. And in the end, despite all the ups and downs and the pushing and the pulling and the good and the bad and the fighting and the loving, I think she showed us in the last few years, deep inside, who she really was. She was a proud wife and a mother and a sister and a friend and a mostly sweet, sometimes sassy, frequently funny, but always a tenacious force of nature who always made sure that she heard what has become her own epitaph. Do you know my husband, Dr. Levy? He's a pediatrician. He's a great and wonderful man. It was never was is. Dad was always alive for her. I have 4 children. Jim, Chuck, Roger, and Judy Irene. Those are their pictures on the wall. We had some fun times together, didn't we? She loved and she worried about us all. Her children, her sisters, her mother, her friends. So the sweet Betty is the one I will remember. And right up to her final days, whenever you asked her how she was doing, she would say, A-OK. And so are we all. A-OK.
We take a moment of silent remembering. Birth is a beginning and death a destination. But life is a journey, a going, a growing from stage to stage, from childhood to maturity and youth to age, from innocence to awareness and ignorance to knowing, from foolishness to discretion and then perhaps to wisdom, from weakness to strength or strength to weakness, and often back again. From health to sickness, and back we pray to health again. From offense to forgiveness, from loneliness to love, from joy to gratitude, from pain to compassion, and grief to understanding, from fear to faith, from defeat to defeat to defeat, until looking backward or ahead, we see that victory lies not at some high place along the way, but in having made the journey, stage by stage, a sacred pilgrimage. Birth is a beginning and death a destination, but life is a journey, a sacred pilgrimage, made stage by stage, from birth to death to life everlasting. At this point, I have to ask, if you can stand, please rise. This is the prayer we say that sends her soul on to her next journey, dancing with Dr. Levy. El malei rachamim shochen b'amromim, hamsei menucha nechona, תחת כנפי השכינה, עם קדושים וטהורים כזוהר הרקיע, מזהירים אותה שהלכה לעולמה. בעל הרחמים, יסתיריה בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, ויצרו בצרור חיים את נשמתה. אדוני הוא נחלתה, ותנוח בשלום על משכבה, ונאמר אמן. Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Betty, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let her find refuge in your eternal presence, and let her soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is her inheritance. May she rest in peace, and let us say, Amen. We now turn to the inside of your handouts. We say together a prayer that is actually nothing to do with death. It's a prayer of praise to God. That's all it says. You'll see the many words. Translation is on the bottom left. If you, like Betty, prefer English, you are welcome to join us in English. But it's important that we raise our voices to thank God for the gift that was Betty. We say together with the mourners, Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, be'alma divra chirutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayei d'chol Beit Yisrael, ba'agala uvizman kariv v'imru amen. Yehe shemei Rabbah mevarach la'alam u'lamei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yithadar v'yit'aleh v'yithalal shemei d'kudsha brichu. La'elam min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbachata v'nechemata, da'amiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehe shalama rabba min shemaya, v'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru amen. May God grant peace to those who mourn and comfort to those who are bereaved. And we say, Amen. Let all who are gathered here repeat these words after me, speaking them to the mourners. May God console you with all who mourn in Zion and Jerusalem. Hamakom yinachem etchem betoch shara v'lei Tzion v'Yerushalayim. Now go forth in peace to life. This concludes the memorial part of the service, but the family has requested that you join them in sharing memories in the parlor down the hall. Stairs direction is out those doors, no stairs direction is out these doors. Thank you so much for coming.